Yeah, this was quite interesting. Concerning the game times that were announced for the first few weeks of the season, and then the backlash coming from Oklahoma AD Joe Castiglione. So, if I catch this right, I don't want to mess up the game times. Two of the first three are 11 a.m. Central. The Tulane game opening weekend, and 2 weeks later against Nebraska. And of course, it was that Nebraska game that caught a lot of people's attention because of the magnitude of the brand names and possibly anticipating that that was going to be at another time. And then some other people chimed in on social media. I'm sure you're way ahead of this compared to me, Jason, but I saw a number of people start to do a little addition and look back on previous seasons and say Oklahoma's had its fair share, if not way too many, what would be noon Eastern time, but 11 a.m. local time kickoffs for a team, a program of Oklahoma's status.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Mark. This has been a discussion that has gained a little bit of legs over the last few years with to your point, a lot of people around here feeling that Oklahoma's getting maybe too many of their fair share of 11 a.m. kickoff games. So I think it's an interesting discussion to have, Mark, when you look at, maybe guys like us that are just sitting around on the couch watching TV on the Saturday, watching football on the Saturday morning. I think whoever it is, whether it's Oklahoma or whoever your favorite team, I think you're probably excited to have that as an early game, so you don't have to wait around all day for your team to kick off. But unfortunately, there's a lot of other components to that. So I think for a game like Nebraska, where this is Oklahoma's biggest, outside of Iowa State, it's their biggest home game of the year, specifically a named team like Nebraska. It's 50 years ago of the game of the century commemoration. I think Oklahoma had planned on a statue unveiling. And so, there's a lot of contributors that kind of come into that 11 a.m. kickoff. Oklahoma is a national brand, so Oklahoma has, they have fans that are coming in from out of town and things like that. They have recruiting. They have people that are coming in for official visits. It's almost impossible for those kids to come to an 11 a.m. game unless it's local in the state of Oklahoma, without having to miss their Friday night game from a high school perspective. And then you think about the merchants, and you think about a lot of those sports bars and grills and restaurants and things like that where they rely on Saturday game days, and they would love to have those 6 p.m., 7 p.m. games local time to kind of bolster that revenue that they count on. So I think overall it's really just a bad, I think, experience. I think the writing was on the wall a little bit, when a couple of weeks ago we heard that Fox was picking up this game, and it's really kind of it's an interesting differentiator because ABC, ESPN, their primetime slot is the 6:30, 7 p.m. game every week, and for Fox, their primetime slot is the 11 a.m. game. So I think a lot of people thought that this might come, but I think more interestingly enough, when it was unveiled a week ago, Mark, that Castiglione actually took to Twitter and took to social media to talk about they tried everything that they possibly could with Fox to be able to move that game around, and with it being their number one primetime slot, they were just in a position that they were unwilling to move that. So I mean, I think it's one of those things. There's always discussion about conference realignment. I think Oklahoma, from a tier 3 TV rights perspective, it's something that I think they're looking at. I think that that contract expires in 24, 25. So, I think it's really just one of those things that's unfortunate that happens, for the fans and the experience overall early on in the year. But, something that fans and media are kind of accustomed to. And, they'll have that, to your point, two out of the first 3 games. And, the other one that hasn't been announced yet, but it's almost always 11 a.m. kickoff is the game against Texas and Dallas. So they'll have their fair share of early on, but maybe you would like to think that it would even out later in the year as those games are announced.
I'm guessing the players themselves don't like to play early.
It's very interesting that you asked that, Mark, because there was a couple of players that took to Twitter really after because it's kind of went a little bit viral locally. There was a couple of players that went to social media and said that they actually prefer the early games. They don't, kind of the same way that maybe, I don't know, maybe fans are watching. They would like they enjoy, getting up, getting breakfast, and going out and playing early. So I thought that was really interesting. I would have been kind of like you. I would have thought that they would like most kids, when you come from high school, you play under the lights every single game, right? And they would like to experience that same thing. But I guess the mentality may be a little bit different with some of these kids these days.
Yeah, and the flip side to that argument, to continue your point, I would think would be, especially when you're playing an extremely big game, maybe just the nerves building all day and just wanting to get to the game and just waiting and waiting and waiting all day with nothing to do, and you can't relax, you can't enjoy yourself, you want to get to the game and get on the field. So I can see both aspects there. Just to extend on your point, as you outlined, ABC and ESPN have been in the college football game forever. Fox is newer to the regular season college football. Fox joined in on college football in the early to mid 2000s and really put their stake on the BCS championship game and a couple major bowl games, but they didn't broadcast any regular season games, which was kind of odd. All of a sudden they show up for championship games. But then Fox got into it about 5 or 6 years ago. So then Fox, as a counter-programming tactic, strategy, knew that it would be difficult for them to wrestle away those primetime audiences away from ABC and ESPN, especially since ABC and ESPN have contracts with all 5 major conferences. Yep. For Fox, it's the Big 12, the Big 10, and the Pac-12. So they don't have the SEC and the ACC. Therefore, it's a smaller selection of games. So ABC and ESPN generally have the opportunity to have better games. Not all the time, but have that opportunity because of having 2 additional conferences, one of them being the SEC. So a couple of years ago, Fox made what has been argued on both sides, a strategic maneuver to say, okay, our prime game is going to be at noon Eastern, 11 Central. We're going to put our best game there because it's generally thought of as you go through the day that the best games are in prime time. Yep. And maybe that next tier is at that 3:30, 2:30 Central window. You see a lot of good games there, and mostly the best games are not at noon. That's the warm-up for the big college football fan that turn on the TV at 11 a.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Central to watch those games. So we're going to counter that by saying, here's our best game. And so there are various, inconveniences or preferences from the fan bases and from the players, as Jason outlined. But from a sheer strategy standpoint of trying to gain the most views, that's what Fox has gone to. The one thing I will say about the statement made by Castiglione is that the conference signs a contract. The conference has the agreement of the members of the schools, 10 in the Big 12, and they know what the deal is. I understand you may have a preference of when you play, but in terms of making it public of your dissatisfaction of when these games are scheduled, when you and your football program and the entire conference has made a decision to sign a contract. It could have been placed in the contract. No particular school will play X number of games before noon Central Time, or there could have been stipulations made in the contract, but there obviously weren't. So you have given the television network carte blanche to schedule these games whenever they want. So I don't think there's really anything to complain about.
No, and I'm with you, and I saw this. I think one of the things that would be interesting, and I don't know how you consider, especially if a team's outside of the top 25, a marquee game, but I think one of the things that if it would have been if they would have been playing a TCU, or they would have been playing their game against Western Carolina, maybe there's not as much. There's not as much impact there, but I see what you're saying. I agree with you. I think it would be interesting to see. Someone did a breakdown of some of the top 4 teams and how many 11 a.m. games, 2:30, 6 evening kickoffs. It was pretty even among the top 4 or 5 schools within the country. That they're pretty consistent, but I think it all depends on what type of game there is there. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, it is what it is. It's one of those things where, to your point, they actually, there was no stipulations within the contract to my knowledge. So you're kind of at the network's mercy. Whatever they decide to do is, certainly what they'll do, and how they'll exercise their right. And Fox has every every reason to do that. And I think it's interesting because when you talk about the Fox broadcast, I think Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt are solid as their number one team. One of the best in the business, and over the years they have been very pro Oklahoma. Specifically, Joel Klatt has been very pro Oklahoma. And now you have Bob Stoops kind of joining the pregame, their big noon Fox telecast. So I think Oklahoma's put a lot of their balls in Fox's court, so to speak. So it's interesting to see how this, maybe this relationship will go, throughout the the remainder of the Tier 3 TV deal.